This is NDTV, and you're watching Classics.
Hello and welcome to the Unstoppable Indians. Every week we take a journey into the life of an outstanding Indian, a person whose talent, acumen or moral example is transforming India. The best, the finest from every field join me, Manvi Dhillon, on this show to share their life story, their journey to success, some of the knocks along the way, what made them get up and keep going, what makes them an unstoppable Indian. Overwhelmed by all the poverty he saw around him, 10 years ago, Vikram Akula decided to take the challenge head on. He set up SKS Microfinance with one objective: to provide financial services to the poor to help change their lives. Both Vikram and SKS have been recognized for the pioneering work in the field. Vikram was named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine in 2006. SKS Microfinance, of course, is the 5th largest microfinance institution in the world, the largest in India. But the real recognition really comes from the 1.7 million people whose lives that Vikram and SKS have touched. Vikram, thanks very much for joining us on the Unstoppable Indians.
Thank you for having me.
Poverty is something that overwhelms a lot of us. It's something we're exposed to a great deal in India particularly. What gave you the faith, the courage, the conviction that you could actually make a difference when you started SKS in 1998?
Right. I think it's true that all of us are confronted with poverty. In my case, I think what happened is, since I grew up in the States and I would see the poverty we have in our country and then go back to an American suburb, it was that contrast between extreme poverty that we have and the extreme wealth of America that, for me, I think was more jarring an experience than what most people face. And I initially didn't know that it would translate into microfinance. I came and I worked for an NGO, basically as a community organizer. And after spending that time, initial time in the field for about a year and a half with this NGO, that was when it was clear to me that economic development was the single most important thing that needed to happen. That if people had money in their hands, then they not only could earn income and build assets, but then you could start doing things related to health or education. But the key was that first people needed to have that economic development.
You know, it's almost easy to crystallize an objective like that, but to get it all going must have been quite daunting. Where do you start? Which are the people that you target? Where are you going to get the initial seed capital from? What was that beginning like?
Right. Well, for me, the early learnings, and I actually spent about 3 years in the NGO sector prior to starting SKS, and basically spent those 3 years in the field, in remote rural areas. And the key learnings for me were from the people themselves, talking with them, understanding what it is they need. And the consistent theme that I kept hearing was they just needed an opportunity. They needed on-time delivery of financial services, and then they had ideas among themselves what to do, whether that be a small kirana store or doing something in agriculture or doing something, like setting up a barber shop. They had ideas. They were just looking for that opportunity. So the key idea, if you will, didn't come from me. It really came from the people themselves in terms of responding to what it is that they felt they needed.
And why microfinance? Was there some inspiration from other institutions?
Sure.
I mean, Grameen as an example, as a neighbor. Why did microfinance become that route?
Right. Now, when I started in the NGO sector, it was sort of the early to mid 90s, and at that point, the Grameen Bank and other microfinance institutions were proving that microfinance was really making a big difference. And even the NGO that I worked with, when I was basically a loan officer, you could see the magic that microfinance had. You put money in people's hands, and they were able to start small businesses, assets, and step by step get out of poverty. So you could see that this is the thing that really made a difference in people's lives. But you also saw, or at least what I saw, was also what I considered a fundamental flaw of microfinance at that time, and that was that it wasn't scaling to large numbers. And there was an incident with a particular woman that sort of shaped SKS. This woman was from a more remote village. She came and said, "Can you start in our village?" And I went back to my NGO directors and said, here's a good opportunity. And they basically said, look, we don't have funds. We can't scale beyond the 100 villages that we're in. And even if we do, we don't have the sort of systems to do so. And I went back and I told this woman, I said, we can't start in another village. And she said something to me that I'll never forget. She said, "Am I not poor too? Do I not deserve a chance to get my family out of poverty?" And for me, that was the fundamental question. If we were not designing microfinance in a way that we could scale, we were effectively doing an injustice to all the poor people who are simply looking for the opportunity. And that was when I decided to leave my NGO and answer that question. How do you design microfinance in a way that you never have to say no to any poor person who's simply asking for an opportunity? And that's when I started SKS.
We're going to flesh that out in just a moment, but you've put your faith in women. Why?
Well, there's three reasons you want to work with women. From a development perspective, women, we all know, especially in rural areas, tend to invest profits back into their household, for their family, for their children. Women also tend to take risky activities. They've got one buffalo, they'll take another buffalo. Men tend to take riskier activities, and so those have a higher risk of failure.